The day the world almost ended didn't start with a bang. It started with a glitch. At exactly 9:00 a.m., every television, smartphone, and billboard on Earth flickered. Then, the sky itself changed. It wasn't blue anymore. It wasn't even gray. The clouds turned a deep, sickening shade of crimson. It looked like the sky was bleeding. People stopped their cars in the middle of the highway. Baristas dropped coffee cups. Kids in playgrounds looked up, their faces turning red under the strange light. Then came the voice. It didn't sound like a person. It sounded like a mountain grinding against another mountain. It was so loud that windows in New York, Tokyo, and London shattered at the same time. People of Terra, the voice boomed. The clock has run out. Your century of protection is over. The blood tax is due. By sunrise, you will deliver 10 million young humans to our labor camps. If the ships are not full, we will boil your oceans into gas. You have 12 hours. The sky didn't just change color, it disappeared. A fleet of ships, each one the size of a small city, drifted into view. They were so massive they blocked out the moon and the sun. They looked like giant, jagged knives made of black glass hanging over our heads. Inside the United Nations war room, it was pure chaos. "We have to fire!" shouted General Briggs, his face sweating. "Launch every nuclear missile we have, now!" The world president sat at the head of the table, his hands shaking so hard he had to hide them under the desk. "General, their shields are made of compressed gravity. Our nukes would be like throwing pebbles at a tank. We would just be giving them an excuse to kill us faster. So what do? A senator screamed. "We can't just give them 10 million children. We are humans. We fight." In the corner of the room, far away from the flashing maps and the screaming generals, sat a man who looked like he belonged in a quiet library, not a war room. His name was Mr. Henderson. He was 60 years old, wearing a suit that was a bit too big for him and a tie that he had probably bought 10 years ago. He wasn't looking at the giant alien ships on the screen. He was looking at a thick, yellow folder and sipping a lukewarm cup of tea. The president looked at him. The room went quiet. "Mr. Henderson, the generals want to start a war. The scientists say we should pray. What do you say?" Henderson slowly put down his tea. He took off his glasses and wiped them with a handkerchief. "Well," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "I've been reading their demand. Several times, actually. And I have to say, their legal department is incredibly sloppy." The generals stared at him like he was insane. "Legal department. They are going to melt the planet. And you're talking about paperwork." "Bad paperwork is the father of bad decisions, General," Henderson replied. He stood up and grabbed a dusty leather briefcase. It was scratched and old, held together by a brass latch that clicked loudly in the silent room. "Don't fire the missiles. You'll just make a mess. Send me up there. I need to talk to whoever is in charge of their billing." The world watched on giant news screens as a tiny, white NASA shuttle, the only thing the aliens would allow to fly, slowly rose from the Earth. It looked like a tiny insect flying toward a swarm of hungry hawks. Inside the shuttle, Henderson wasn't checking a parachute or a laser gun. He was organizing his pens. He was highlighting sentences in a book of intergalactic law. He looked like a man going to a boring Tuesday morning meeting. The shuttle landed inside the Imperial flagship. When the doors opened, the air smelled like ozone and old metal. Hundreds of alien soldiers stood in lines. They were terrifying, 8 feet tall, covered in thick scales with 4 arms holding glowing pulse rifles. They wanted to see a human hero. They wanted to see a warrior they could break. Instead, they saw Mr. Henderson. He stepped off the shuttle, tripped slightly on the ramp, adjusted his glasses, and looked around the massive, gold-plated docking bay. He walked right up to the biggest, scariest-looking alien guard. The guard pointed a glowing weapon at Henderson's chest. Henderson didn't blink. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and tapped it with his finger. "I believe there's a massive mistake in your paperwork," Henderson said, his voice echoing through the silent alien ship. "And if you don't call your supervisor down here right now, this is going to get very, very expensive for you." The aliens didn't fire. They were too confused to fire. They had conquered 1,000 worlds, but no one had ever asked to speak to their supervisor. The war hadn't started yet, but the lawsuit had. The Imperial throne room was a nightmare made of gold and sorrow. It was the size of 4 football stadiums. The walls were lined with the skulls of kings from 1,000 conquered planets. At the very end of the room sat the Grand Emperor of the Silos Empire. He was a mountain of muscle and dark scales, with eyes that glowed like dying stars. Around him stood the Black Guard, warriors 7 feet tall, covered in armor that seemed to swallow the light. They didn't just carry guns, they carried energy blades that hummed with the sound of 1,000 bees. Mr. Henderson walked down the long, red carpet. His shoes made a small click-clack sound that echoed in the massive space. He looked tiny. He looked like an ant walking into a dragon's den. The Emperor leaned forward, his massive claws digging into his throne made of bones. He began to laugh. It wasn't a nice laugh. It sounded like rocks grinding together in a blender. A lawyer. The Emperor sneered, his voice shaking the very floor Henderson stood on. We demanded your children, tiny human. We demanded the future of your species as a blood tax. And Earth sends me, a man in a cheap suit. Why have you brought me a man who fights with words instead of steel? The warriors laughed. The sound was deafening. But Mr. Henderson didn't flinch. He didn't sweat. He didn't even look afraid. He simply stopped, set his leather briefcase on the floor, and clicked the latches open. Snap, snap. The sound was small, but in the sudden silence of the room, it felt like a gunshot. Your Majesty, Henderson said, his voice as calm as a librarian's. I am not here to fight you. I am here to save you from a very, very big mistake. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, glowing piece of ancient parchment. It wasn't paper like we have on Earth. It was made of a strange, translucent material that shimmered with blue light. This, Henderson said, holding it up, is the Galactic Treaty of Neutral Zones. It was signed exactly 400 years ago by your great-grandfather, Emperor Xylos III. If you look at Section 8, Paragraph 4, it clearly states that the third planet of this solar system, Earth, is a protected biological sanctuary. The Emperor's laughter died instantly. His eyes narrowed. He gestured with a massive claw, and the paper flew from Henderson's hand into his own. He scanned it, his face turning a dark shade of purple. This treaty is old, the Emperor roared, ripping the air with his voice. It is a dusty promise from a dead man. My great-grandfather was weak. I am strong. I have a fleet that can crack your planet like an egg. This paper means nothing to my cannons. The warriors gripped their weapons tighter. They were ready to turn Henderson into ash. Actually, Henderson said, adjusting his glasses and looking the Emperor right in the eye, it means everything. You see, Your Majesty, you aren't just a king. You are a CEO. Your empire is a business. And like any business, you have investors. Henderson pulled out a small tablet from his pocket and tapped the screen. A holographic chart appeared in the air between them. It was full of red lines and complex symbols. You see, Henderson continued, the Xylos Empire doesn't own its ships. You lease them from the Galactic Bank of Orion. You also buy your warp fuel from the Nebula Syndicate on credit. And according to the fine print of that old treaty, any leader who violates a protected sanctuary is immediately flagged for high risk default. The Emperor froze. The purple color in his face began to fade into a sickly gray. What are you saying, human? The Emperor hissed. I'm saying that the moment your first ship entered Earth's atmosphere without a legal invitation, I filed a notice of violation with the Orion Bank, Henderson explained. If you fire a single shot, or if you take a single human child, the bank will freeze your accounts instantly. Every credit, every gold bar, every digital coin you own will be locked. Henderson took a step closer to the throne. Think about your soldiers, Your Majesty. They are brave. They are strong. But they haven't been paid in 3 months. If their paychecks don't hit their accounts tomorrow because you wanted to play bully, do you think they will stay loyal? Or do you think they will realize that a king who can't pay for fuel is just a man in a very expensive chair? The room went deathly silent. The Black Guard, the terrifying warriors who were ready to kill, actually looked at each other. Their eyes weren't full of bloodlust anymore. They were full of worry. They had families on other planets. They had bills to pay. They liked winning wars, but they liked getting paid much, much more. You're lying, the Emperor whispered, but his hand was shaking as he held the ancient treaty. I'm a lawyer, Your Majesty, Henderson said with a tiny, sharp smile. I don't have to lie. The truth is much more painful. You can't afford this war, literally. You are bankrupt if you stay here another hour. The Emperor looked at his generals. He looked at his guards. He saw the doubt in their eyes. He realized that the tiny man in the cheap suit hadn't brought a bomb. He had brought something much more dangerous, a bill they couldn't pay. You think this saves you? The Emperor growled, trying to regain his pride. I can still kill you where you stand. You could? Henderson nodded. But then my law firm back on Earth would file a wrongful death suit against your estate. And believe me, my partners are much meaner than I am. They'll take your palace just to cover the legal fees. For the first time in history, a Grand Emperor of the Xylos Empire looked truly, deeply afraid. And it wasn't because of a sword. It was because of a man with a briefcase who knew exactly where the commas were. The Emperor's face was no longer just purple. It was a dark, bruised violet. He looked like a volcano about to explode. He slammed his fist onto the arm of his bone throne, snapping a rib-shaped piece of gold. "I am the conqueror of worlds," he screamed. "I have burned cities and silenced suns. Do you really think a group of accountants in suits can stop my destiny? I will burn that paper. I will crush your skull. And I will take what I want from your little blue dirt ball." Mr. Henderson didn't move. He didn't even look up. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned silver pocket watch. He clicked it open, looked at the time, and clicked it shut. "You could certainly try, Your Majesty," Henderson said. His voice was lower now. It wasn't the voice of a nervous old man anymore. It was the voice of a predator who had just seen his prey step into a snare. "But while you were busy shouting, the clock was ticking. I've already sent a high-speed digital copy of that treaty, along with a live video feed of this conversation, to the Orion auditors and the Galactic Trade Commission. They don't like it when people shout at their business partners." Henderson reached back into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a second folder. This one was bright, warning label red. He tossed it onto the floor at the Emperor's feet. "I also found something else," Henderson continued. "Your empire is demanding a blood tax. You claim this is your right because of the right of conquest. But let's look at the actual law. To conquer a planet, you must have boots on the ground, assign surrender from the local government, and control over at least 60% of the energy grid." Henderson looked around the massive, empty docking bay and the cold, golden throne room. "You haven't done any of that," he said with a shrug. "You've just parked your ships in our sky. In legal terms, Your Majesty, you aren't a conqueror. You're a loiterer. This isn't an invasion. It's harassment of a sovereign species combined with unauthorized parking in a restricted star system." The Emperor growled, a deep sound that vibrated in his chest. "What is a parking ticket to a god?" Henderson smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a shark gives right before it bites. "Oh, it's not a ticket. You see, under Section 92 of the Interstellar Trade Code, if you harass a species without a formal, notarized declaration of war, the victim is allowed to sue for universal damages. I filed the lawsuit 10 minutes ago. I am currently suing the Xylos Empire for 500 quadrillion credits." The Emperor's head advisor, a thin, nervous alien with 3 eyes and a long, shaking tail, scuttled forward. He grabbed the red folder, opened it, and began reading at lightning speed. His 3 eyes started darting back and forth so fast they looked like they were vibrating. The advisor turned to the Emperor and whispered, his voice cracking with terror. "Sire, he's right. He's absolutely right. The math is perfect. Because we didn't declare war properly, every second we stay here, the fine doubles. If we stay for another hour, the debt will be higher than the value of our entire home world. They won't just freeze our accounts. They will take our home planet's mineral rights, our atmosphere, processors, and even your palace as a legal settlement." The Emperor looked at his advisor, then back at Henderson. You would take my home, my world, over a mistake in a document." "I wouldn't take it." Henderson corrected him politely. "The bank would. They'd probably sell it to a mining corporation to pay off your debts. I hear the Asteroid Belt Mining Co. is looking for a new headquarters. Your palace would make a lovely warehouse for iron ore." The warriors of the Black Guard were now whispering among themselves. The tension in the room had shifted. They weren't looking at Henderson as a victim anymore. They were looking at him as the man who was about to make them homeless. "You humans are monsters," the Emperor hissed. "We don't fight with honor. You fight with lists, with rules." "Honor doesn't pay the bills, Your Majesty," Henderson replied. He checked his pocket watch again. "You now have exactly 4 minutes before the late fee kicks in. That fee alone is enough to buy 3 of your destroyers. If I were you, I'd start looking at the exit signs." The Emperor looked down at the red folder on the floor. To anyone else, it was just paper. To him, it was a bomb that was currently tearing his empire apart without firing a single shot. He realized that Earth wasn't a weak planet. It was a planet that had mastered the one thing more powerful than plasma cannons: bureaucracy. "What do you want?" the Emperor asked, his voice suddenly very tired. "It's very simple," Henderson said, closing his briefcase with a satisfying click. "I want you to leave. I want a signed apology for the ski, reddening it's very bad for our farmers' crops, and I want a permanent do not disturb agreement for this solar system." The Emperor looked at his generals. They all nodded, their faces pale. They didn't want to be the generation that lost the empire to a lawyer. "Fine," the Emperor spat. "But know this, human. This is not a defeat of our spirit. It is only a retreat from your paperwork." "That's what they all say," Henderson muttered under his breath. He turned around and began walking back toward his shuttle, not even looking back at the bone throne or the 1,000 warriors. "Oh, and your majesty." The Emperor looked up. "You're out of toner on your primary printer," Henderson said, pointing to the glowing parchment. "The signature on page 12 is a bit blurry. You should really have your IT department look at that. It's a major security risk." Henderson stepped into his shuttle and the doors hissed shut. He had just saved Earth, and he still had time to make it home for his evening tea. The sky over Earth began to hum. It wasn't the terrifying, glass-shattering roar of engines this time. It was the sound of a retreat. On every continent, billions of people held their breath as they looked up. The giant, black glass ships, the ones that had promised to boil the oceans, were moving. Slowly, almost awkwardly, the massive knife-shaped vessels began to tilt upward, backing away from the atmosphere like a dog that had just been yelled at by a very small, very angry cat. Inside the Imperial flagship, the chaos was different now. It wasn't the chaos of war, it was the chaos of a boardroom panic. Officers were frantically deleting files. The Emperor's personal accountants were screaming into their communication devices. The blood tax was forgotten. The only thing that mattered now was survival. The Emperor stood on his balcony, watching the tiny human shuttle drift away. He was shaking. He looked at the view screen and activated a wide beam transmission. He wanted the last word. He needed to feel powerful one last time. "This is not over, human," the Emperor screamed, his voice echoing through Henderson's shuttle speakers. "You have tricked us with your clever words today, but laws are just walls made of ink. We will return. We will go home. We will hire our own scholars, and we will return with a formal, perfect declaration of war. When the paperwork is correct, your laws will be useless, and your planet will burn." Mr. Henderson was halfway through the door of his shuttle. He stopped. He didn't turn around with fear. He turned around with a look of genuine, almost fatherly pity. He walked back to the microphone, his boots clicking softly on the metal floor. "You can try, Your Majesty," Henderson said, his voice flat and calm. "But I think you're missing the bigger picture. You see, while I was waiting for your guards to bring me into the throne room, I had some free time. I did a little bit of research into your empire's financial history. It's public record after all, once you know which databases to hack. Legally access." Henderson adjusted his tie. "My law firm back on Earth has 50,000 employees. We have experts in trade, experts in taxes, and experts in corporate sabotage. We've already spent the last hour looking at your spice trade profits for the last 300 years. Did you know that under reporting intergalactic income is a Class A felony in this sector? You've been hiding profits from the Nebula Syndicate and the Orion Bank for centuries." Henderson leaned in closer to the camera. "By the time we finish filing the audit requests and the tax fraud investigations, you won't just be out of a job. You'll be in a debtor's prison on a moon with no atmosphere. By next Tuesday, your throne will be sold at a public auction to pay for Earth's new satellite defense system. So, please, go home. Check your mail. You've got a lot of work to do." The Emperor didn't reply. He couldn't. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. The screen went black. A few minutes later, the sky over Earth finally cleared. The blood-red clouds vanished, replaced by the soft, natural blue of a beautiful afternoon. The giant shadows lifted. The invincible fleet didn't just leave. They engaged their warp drives so fast they left streaks of white light across the stars. They weren't running from nukes. They were running from an audit. Back on Earth, the UN war room was silent. The generals looked at the empty screens. The president looked at his tea. "Eyes, is it over?" the president asked. The general checked his radar. "They're gone, sir. They've cleared the solar system. Their signature is fading. They're heading back to their home world at maximum speed." When Mr. Henderson's shuttle finally landed back at the NASA base, there were no marching bands. There were no medals. There was just a quiet, tired man stepping out onto the tarmac. He looked exhausted. He looked like he had spent 10 hours doing someone's taxes, which in a way he had. The world president met him at the bottom of the ramp. "Mr. Henderson, you saved 5 billion people. You saved our children. How can we ever thank you? What do you want? A monument? A billion credits?" Henderson looked at his dusty briefcase and then at his watch. "Actually, sir, I'd just like to go home. I left my oven on low, and I'm pretty sure I have some paperwork of my own to finish before Monday." The president laughed, but it was a shaky, relieved laugh. "You're a hero, Henderson. A terrifying, terrifying hero." "No, sir," Henderson replied as he walked toward his car. "I'm just a guy who reads the fine print. People always ignore the fine print. That's usually where the most interesting things are hidden." As the years went by, Earth became a legend in the galaxy. Not because we were the strongest, or the fastest, or the most violent. We became the planet that no one dared to touch because of our legal shield. Other alien empires would look at our solar system and say, "Don't go there. They don't fight fair. They'll sue you until your grandchildren are born in debt." The galaxy learned a very important lesson. You can survive a laser blast. You can rebuild after a bombing. But you can never, ever recover from a human lawyer with a grudge and a briefcase full of evidence. Humanity didn't need to build bigger guns. We just needed to hire better accountants. And in the dark, cold vacuum of space, that was the most human victory of all.